Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. I am an avid herpetologist and I have got a Yu-Gi-Oh deck profile for you guys today. We're going to be covering the very first actual herpetology deck profile that I have done on this channel. That's right, we are going to be covering a reptile based archetype from Yu-Gi-Oh, specifically the Ogdoadics. Now the Ogdoadics are a series of light and dark reptile monsters themed after the real world Egyptian Ogdoad. Now, the Ogdoad was a series of 8 primordial deities worshipped in the Egyptian culture. It was a series of 4 male and female pairings, which kind of governed different aspects of their belief system. So the Ogdoadics in Yu-Gi-Oh, by contrast, as I mentioned, are all reptile themed. The real Ogdoad were not all themed around reptiles, but for this archetype, they are actually all based around snakes. Now, they are sticking with the theme of having male and female pairings. There are a total of 9, however. We have our 4 male and female pairings, each one being light or dark, with our darks being the males. No, excuse me, the lights are the males, and the dark attributes are the females. And then we also have our big boss monster, our 9th monster, Ogdoadics, the Ogdoadic Overlord. Unfortunately, he is not included in this archetype, but he's kind of the big overarching boss monster, and is actually quite playable in this archetype if you ever do decide to run him, but please do feel free to do that. But we're going to be doing my take on a Chaos build for this archetype. Now, as I mentioned, these are all light and dark, so the Chaos theme fits in like an absolute glove, and it is a very powerful combo deck. Now, unfortunately, I am making this video in the midst of the Ishizu tier element and bestial meta. So if you are looking to play a light or dark graveyard themed deck in this meta, let's just be honest, it's going to be a rough time. But this is still a very fun deck if you're looking for something new or different that you want to try, if you just happen to like reptiles and we're looking for a different take on how to build the Ogdoadics. Hey, maybe try this build out for yourself. It is a lot of fun. It is very explosive. It can do crazy extensions into very awesome end boards. And I've got some really cool tech choices in here that I think you guys are going to like. So we'll start by talking a little bit about the archetype itself, because we're not running all of the Ogdoadic cards, but we are running quite a few of them. So to begin with, the first card that we have here, that's going to be Nunu, the Ogdoadic Remnant, and the pairing, of course, being Nauya, the Ogdoadic Remnant as well. Again, we have a light and a dark pairing between these two monsters. Now, these are going to be the deck's 2 biggest setup pieces. Each one has a parallel effect to the other, where you can send it to the graveyard to send a reptile monster of the opposite attribute from your deck to your graveyard. So the whole idea for this is going to be loading your graveyard up with lots of reptiles and making plays from there. Now, they each have secondary effects. In the case of Nunu here, you can send it to the hand to graveyard, send a dark reptile from your deck to the graveyard. If you have no monsters in play or control an Ogdoadic monster, you can also special summon this card, but then it vanishes if it would leave the field. And while this card is in play, you cannot special summon any monsters except reptile monsters. By contrast, we have Nauya, the Ogdoadic Remnant, which again sends from hand to grave for a light reptile deck to yard. If this card is normal or special summon, you can then add an Ogdoadic spell or trap from your deck to your hand. Now, there are not a whole lot of super playable Ogdoadic spell or traps, but there is one in particular that is exceptional, and a second one that you can potentially run called, I think, Serpent Strike in the TCG, but for our purposes, we are actually only running one target for this, and that one target is really all we really need. So those are going to be our 2 primary setup pieces. We also are going to be playing a single copy of Zohah, the Ogdoadic Boundless. Now this card has a lot of effects, so give me a second and we're going to discuss these, because there's some synergies with this card. This is another one of our big setup pieces. So if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard or special summoned from the graveyard, you can activate this effect. Your opponent will draw a card, and then if they do, you can then add any Ogdoadic monster from your deck to your hand, except Zohah. Then both players have to send a card from their hand to the graveyard. If this card is in the graveyard, you can also send one card from your hand to the graveyard to add this card back to your hand. And these are, of course, all up to this point, all of these effects have been hard once per turns. Now, Zohah is, okay, so to break that down, so basically, if he is special summoned from the graveyard, or is sent to the graveyard from the field, you can tutor for any Ogdoadic card you want and send it to the graveyard, or any card you want from your hand to the graveyard. Your opponent basically just has a Dark World Dealings, where they're going to draw one and discard whatever they want. Now, this doesn't sound super good, but Trust me, we're going to talk a little bit more about the synergies. It is actually quite powerful. One of the best startup plays you're going to want to make with this deck involves having Nunu in hand, pitching it, and sending Zohah. Zohah can then discard another card from your hand to add itself. You normal summon Zohah, special summon Nunu from the graveyard, and you're kind of off to the races from there. That's going to be one of the easiest startup plays that you can make with this deck. So we are also going to be playing 2 of our level 8s Ogdoadics. We're going to be playing 1 each of the Ogdoadic Light and Ogdoadic Dark. We have Aleirtt, the Ogdoadic Dark, and Keurse, the Ogdoadic Light. Now, each one of these, again, can be sent off of the opposite respective Ogdoadic Searcher, either that Nauya or Nunu. We have Keurse, who's actually, in my opinion, the stronger of the two. If this card is in the graveyard, you can tribute a monster to special summon it out. Then your opponent can special summon any monster from their graveyard, but this effect would be negated. If this card is special summon, you can then target 1 level 4 or lower Ogdoadic monster in your graveyard, special summon it, but banish it when it leaves the field. So the typical use for Keurse is going to be being sent off of Nauya. Nauya, ideally, being in the graveyard with Keurse, you can then tribute a monster, summon Keurse. Keurse summons Nauya, tutors your Ogdoadic spell card, and again, this is going to be an excellent way to extend your plays. Now, the other Ogdoadic card, Ogdoadic Dark, if this card is in the graveyard, you can tribute a monster to special summon this card out. Then your opponent can add a monster from their graveyard to their hand. Now, make sure you keep track of both of those effects because they are super relevant. Now, your opponent being able to summon a monster from the graveyard, depending on what you're planning on doing that turn, may matter. It may not. If you're going first, if you're going second, you know, just keep that in mind. But Aleirtt being able to give your opponent the chance to add, for instance, like a hand trap from graveyard back to hand can be dangerous. So please make sure you're being careful when you're using this card. But it is still super powerful and super useful. So when this card is special summoned, you can then target 2 of your banished monsters, including at least 1 reptile, and return them to the graveyard. Since we have a lot of effects that are going to be banishing our cards, being able to return them and recycle them for future turns if necessary, again, super helpful. We are playing cards that care about how many reptiles are in our graveyard, as well as other cards, so being able to bring things back and raise that number up can also, again, be super helpful. Now, the last Ogdoadic card we are going to be playing is Aron, the Ogdoadic King. This is actually one of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh cards, period. It's a really, really cool card. This is a level 8 monster, has 2,500 attack and 2,800 defense. I'm mentioning the stats for the first time because this is the first of our monsters thus far that are probably going to want to stay in play. Up to now, all of the other cards we've talked about are mostly combo pieces to lead into other things. However, Aron here is actually something of a floodgate. It's actually got a pretty useful in-play effect that you may want to leave in play if you're going first and are looking for disruptive things to leave out for an end board. So, if this card is in your graveyard, you contribute 2 monsters to special summon it out. If your opponent adds a card from to their hand, except during the draw phase or damage step, you can then send a random card from their hand to the graveyard. So this is where that floodgate effect is going to come in. So if they add cards to hand, either from Alert's effect, if they Dark World Dealings, like something from Zohah, or they use, for instance, like a Reinforcement of the Army or any search spell on their own turn, you can then force them to randomly discard. This disruption can actually be very powerful, especially depending on the other things that you have going on in your hand. Now, that has a couple of other effects. They're not quite as relevant. If a monster is your opponent controls is sent to the graveyard, you can add a light or dark reptile from your deck to your hand. Not going to be super meaningful because that's not super helpful for comboing, but if this card is out, you can potentially get some extra extenders off it for your next turn as long as it makes it back to you. But yeah, so Aron here has got a couple of really cool synergies. As I mentioned, you can trigger his effect on both turns thanks to cards like Zohah and Aleirtt. And since we are actually, as you see, are playing some copies of Mass Change 2, we are able to make Masked Hero Dark Law. So Masked Hero Dark Law, as you guys may already know, has a similar effect where if your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, you can also, again, force them to discard a random card, but while Dark Law is in play, they have to banish that card. So if you have both of these in play, and again, you have the ability to force them to do this on your turn, you can potentially be forcing your opponent to get rid of up to 3 cards banished before they've even had a chance to take a turn, depending on how you're opening that particular game. So very, very powerful. All right, so now we're going to start going through some of our other cards here. So we are playing quite a few other reptile-themed monsters to play around the synergies for those particular card types. To begin with, we have 2 copies of Lightserpent. Now, Lightserpent is a pretty simple card. It is a level 3, 1200 attack monster. If this card is sent from the hand to the graveyard, you can then special summon it out, but it cannot be used as synchro material. We are actually playing a couple of tuners, so not being able to tune with it does actually matter. There are some really cool level 7s that could potentially be made if this was able to be used, such as, FA Dawn Dragster, but unfortunately we cannot do that. However, this is still great as link material and also as tribute fodder for some of our graveyard effects for the Ogdoadics. So that's going to be the big thing there. Going right alongside it, we do also have, of course, Danger Tsuchinoko. Only really able to play the one copy, but that one copy is plenty. It's a typical danger card where you can choose to reveal it and then discard a random card. If you discard a different card, you special summon it out and draw a card. Or if you discard this, its effect when it's discarded just lets you special summon it out. So this will not trigger off of Zohah's effect to discard a card. Just because it does need to be discarded, and Zohah here sends a card from hand to graveyard when it adds itself. However, Lightserpent does special summon itself. So if you have a Lightserpent in hand, send it to the graveyard for Zohah to add Zohah to your hand. Lightserpent will be able to summon itself as, again, another little extra extender. So that is cool. Definitely keep that in mind. We are going to be playing 3 copies of Reptilianne Coatl. I'm sorry we're going out of order, but we're going to cover our reptile monsters first before we get into some of our other tech choices. Now, Reptilianne Coatl is again a level 4 monster. This is a reptile tuner. If you control a dark reptile monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. That is a very easy condition to meet. Then, if your opponent controls any monsters with 0 attack, you can special summon other Reptilianne monsters from your hand up to the number with 0 attack. Doesn't come up very often, in fact, it almost never comes up, but that is something to keep in mind. If your opponent, for instance, happens to summon an Ash Blossom from their graveyard, if they happen to have one in there when you summon Keurse, you'll then be able to drop another Coatl if it's in your hand. It's an extremely niche situation, but keep it in mind. Then, you can if this card you control would be used as synchro material for a reptile monster, you can treat it as a non-tuner. This, again, doesn't come up super often. There is one level 8 reptile synchro monster that you can consider running called Reptilianne Melusine. It's actually a very cool card, but not necessarily the strongest. But it is a very cool card, so you can consider running that in the extra deck, but you're going to find out very quickly, extra deck space in this deck is extremely tight, so you may not necessarily want to find room for that. But the last reptile card that we're going to be talking about is Night Sword Serpent. This was actually a bulk common in one of the recent Yu-Gi-Oh sets in the TCG. If this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon it out, but banish it when it leaves the field. So we have quite a few ways in this deck to send monsters from our deck to the graveyard. We have Foolish Burial, we have Snake Rain. So being able to summon this card for free whenever you use one of those effects, again, is just a nice extra extender, and it is level 4, meaning it's great as level 8 tuner fodder, as well as Xyz material, or just using it for links. Now, if it does get special summoned by that effect, it does, of course, banish itself, but as I've already mentioned, we can return it to the graveyard with effects like Alertt, so again, just make sure you're keeping in mind the potential downsides for that effect. Now we're going to start talking about our Chaos Engine. We are, of course, going to be playing the cards that require no introduction, White Dragon Wyverburster and Black Dragon Collapserpent. We are also playing a single copy of Chaos Valkyria, just because it is a very generic extender, again, being level 4, and being able to summon itself by banishing any light or dark monster. We are playing a single copy of the Chaos Creator. This, again, is a phenomenal extender. We do banish quite a few cards from our deck, so being able to get its summon effect is very simple, and it is level 8, meaning we can make our level 8 Xyz plays that we want to be making with cards like Keurse, Alertt, and even Aron if we happen to go that route. So Chaos Creator is a super, super cool card there. And we are playing a very spicy tech card in the form of Destiny Hero Plasma. This, again, is one of my favorite cards, and it's kind of a selfish inclusion, but this card actually fits very well into this archetype. You can fit just the 4 spaces into your main board for your single copy of Destiny Hero Plasma and 3 copies of D-Force, and this card is actually a very powerful card that can shut down a lot of decks. Having a one-sided skill drain is very difficult for some decks to get through, especially if it has built-in protection a la D-Force. Now, Destiny Hero Plasma, while in play, does give a one-sided skill drain effect where all monsters in play have their effects negated on your opponent's side, but it also has a relinquished effect where it can also equip one of your opponent's monsters to itself to gain attack points equal to half of that monster's attack. So this card can get very scary very quickly. We are playing our single copy of Monster Reborn. Again, we are a graveyard-based strategy, and we are going to be playing a copy of Zombie Vampire in the extra, so summoning an opponent's monster to XC summon with is a possibility as well. We have Foolish Burial, sending cards deck to graveyard, of course, super valuable. We have our single copy of Instant Fusion. Our Instant Fusion target is going to be Magikey Beast Ansyalabolas. I apologize if I mispronounced that. We'll get to him in just a moment. Magikey Beast, basically, it again is a level 4. It is Dark Attribute. It is a tuner. Basically, just fitting as many of those boxes as we can. We want to keep our numbers nice and round, so that's what we're going with. Now for the most important card in the entire deck. That is Snake Rain. Now, Snake Rain is the strongest setup card you can ask for in the Ogdoadic archetype. Discarding a card from your hand to send any 4 reptiles from deck to grave will basically set you up for your entire combo by itself. You can send a wide number of combination of cards. Something as simple as Nunu, Nauya, Keurse, and Aleirtt will already be a free rank 8 Xyz monster just by itself. If you're curious about how that line works, you summon Nunu by its own effect since you have an empty board. Tribute it to summon Keurse. Keurse then summons Nauya. You'll then add your Ogdoadic spell to your hand. Then you'll use Aleirt to tribute Nauya, which will summon itself. So now you have 2 level 8s. You'll send Nunu and Nauya back to the graveyard for use the following turn. And now you have 2 free level 8 bodies, not even using your normal summon. But there are plenty of other combinations you can do that can potentially extend you even further. We'll talk a little bit about those, but Snake Rain is definitely one of the best cards in the deck. If you have a way to try to bait out an Ash Blossom before playing this, I highly recommend trying at least, just to see if your opponent may accidentally, spend that card before they see that you have this very powerful opening card. We are going to be playing 3 copies of Chaos Space, which lets you send any light or dark from hand to graveyard to add a light or dark monster that cannot be normal summoned or set, but with level between 4 and 8 from deck to hand. That is the opposite attribute of the card sent. We have 5 targets, being, of course, Wyverburster, Collapserpent, Chaos Valkyria, Chaos Creator, and Destiny Hero Plasma, which does have the effect where it cannot be normal summoned or set. It can only be special summoned by tributing 3 monsters. We can get 3 bodies on the board very, very easily, so it's pretty easy to get him, but this is another way of searching him out. Now, we also have 3 copies of our Ogdoadic single spell, and that is Ogdoadic Water Lily. This card is super awesome. It is very, very cool. Lets you send any reptile deck from your deck to your graveyard. Then if you have 5 or more reptiles with different names in your graveyard, you can special summon any reptile you want from your yard. Now you can only activate 1 per turn. So again, there's lots of really cool things you can do with this particular card. It is a great way to finish your board setup, or again, just extend your plays. So one of the things you can do is, of course, send Aron from deck to graveyard and summon it out for free without having to tribute 2 monsters if you want an extra disruption at the end of your board rotation. One other cool thing you can do is, if you have done link plays, and you already have a Reptilianne Coatl in your graveyard, you can use Ogdoadic Water Lily to send Serpent. You'll then use the effect of Water Lily to summon Reptilianne Coatl, and Serpent will then summon itself, giving you again 2 level 4 bodies with 1 tuner and a non-tuner to make potential level 8 synchro plays. So you're starting to see how some of these combos kind of tie together. There's a lot. This is a very complicated deck, I will admit that. Maybe I should just go ahead and post some gameplay for this deck. I probably will post them at some point. Trying to find people on Master Duel who are willing to actually stick around and watch the full combo can be a little troublesome, but we'll see if we can get some good gameplay for you guys. We are playing a single copy of Lair of Darkness. Now, Lair of Darkness, you've probably seen some other Ogdoadic builds very solidly built around this card. I find playing a big Lair of Darkness package to be a little clunky and potentially bricky. You don't want to see a lot of this card, but when it does come up, it is extremely powerful. So this basically makes all cards on the field into dark monsters. And once per turn, if you would tribute a monster to activate an effect, you can tribute one of your opponent's dark monsters instead. Now, basically what that means is that if you're tributing things for, Aron, Aleirt, Keurse, you can tribute one of your opponent's monsters to summon it out. So you're removing their board presence and getting your own board presence at the same time. Very, very powerful. Now, this is a card that I'm playing as a one-of because even though it is, again, super powerful, it's not necessarily a big combo starter. It's just a very nice card advantage generator. It does have an effect where at the end of each turn, you will summon tokens equal to the number of monsters that were tributed during that turn. So it's also going to give you some extra bodies for added protection. But as a nice one-of, when you see it, it is super, super nice. we are going to be playing 3 copies of D-Force. Now, if you are not familiar with D-Force, this is, again, a very cool card that makes the classic card Destiny Hero Plasma incredibly scary. So when this card is activated, you can add a copy of Destiny Hero Plasma from deck or graveyard to hand, so you don't have to worry if you discard your Destiny Hero Plasma. If you have one of these, you can then, of course, bring it back, even from your graveyard. And while Destiny Hero Plasma is in play, you will then apply all 3 of these following effects. First of all, you do not draw during your draw phase. Now, that is a big setback, but we are playing a lot out of our graveyard, so it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. Your opponent cannot target any cards you control with card effects, which is phenomenal protection. And you have an effect where your Destiny Hero Plasma in play gains an extra 100 attack for every monster in both graveyards, and it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and it can make a second attack during each battle phase. So D-Force does a lot. It basically makes Destiny Hero Plasma one of the scariest boss monsters out there in the game. It is very powerful. This card is super awesome. It's great for breaking boards. And again, it slots very well into this deck where we are already playing lots of Light and Darks. We're playing lots of free summons. It's very easy to get 3 bodies on the board to tribute off for Destiny Hero Plasma and still have other things to do with the rest of our board state, including making rank 8 Xyzes and things of that nature. So very, very powerful. I find it to be a very effective engine in this particular list. And we're going to wrap things up with 2 copies of Mask Change 2. Now, Mask Change 2 is a quick play spell that lets you discard a card, target any face-up monster you control that has a level, you send it to the graveyard, and if it left the field by this effect, you would then special summon a masked hero from your deck that is the same attribute but has a higher level. So basically, what the whole idea for this card is of course going to be summoning Masked Hero Dark Law. So now we're finally going to talk a little bit more about this guy. So Masked Hero Dark Law is very powerful, even in our current meta where we are very much, again, rotating around the graveyard. We have a lot of tutors, which are always relevant, so being able to disrupt your opponent's hand if they choose to add anything to it can be very powerful. But having that one-sided Macrocosmos effect is really the go-to for this card. It is so strong in the meta right now. And it's so easy to trigger this card too. For instance, if you Mask Change 2 your Zohah, which is in play, already, right off the bat, you get to trigger Zohah's effect since it goes to the graveyard from the card effect. Masked Hero will then be in play. You force your opponent to draw. They have to banish a card from their hand. Then you randomly banish a second card from their hand thanks to Masked Hero Dark Law. If you happen to have Zohah and Aron the Ogdoadic King in play, and then you Mask Change Zohah, then you force your opponent to banish 3 cards from their hand. If you are going first, that leaves them with only a 3-card hand to begin with. Again, this is a very, very potent, very powerful disruption effect, and again, I think it very much does warrant the inclusion. It's just one extra little spicy tech card that I've been running and finding a lot of success with. So now we're going to talk about the extra deck, and there are probably quite a few cards you may have expected to see and don't see. There are a lot, and I do mean a lot of cards that you can play both in the main board and in the extra deck for Ogdoadics. This is just my particular list, but yes, there are plenty of other cards that you can absolutely be playing. This is just my particular tech choices. So our 2 fusions we've already talked about. We have Magikey Beast and we have Masked Hero Dark Law. We are playing a single synchro monster. Of course, it's going to be Borreload Savage Dragon, probably the best level 8 that we can make. Very easy to do with our Reptilianne Coatl and Nightsword Serpent off of a single Ogdoadic Water Lily. So if you do your rotation, make ideally link play so you can benefit from Borreload, or you can run other synchros if you think they'd be better. Basically, your Ogdoadic Water Lily is a 1-card level 8 synchro. So if you're able to make Borreload, fantastic. If not, maybe run something different, but it's very easy to do that. We're going to skip the EXCs real quick and just talk about our link monsters, because our link monsters they're not necessarily the centerpiece. This is a deck that plays a lot of different card types, but they are very important for, again, certain setup plays as well. So we do play IP Masquerena. It's a big staple. Probably doesn't surprise anybody. We are playing our copy of Appaloosa. We are playing a single copy of Reptilianne Echidna. So this monster can be made with any 2 monsters as long as you include at least 1 reptile. When this card is link summoned, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and make its attack 0. During your main phase, if your opponent controls a monster with 0 attack, you can then add reptiles from your deck to your hand, equal to the number of monsters your opponents control that have 0 attack. So it kind of sets itself up for 1. If they have more, awesome. But basically, it's a way to reduce a monster's attack to 0. So as long as your opponent has something in attack position, you can potentially OTK them, because we are going to be making very big bodies to swing over it with. The last link monster we're playing is really to help with back row removal, because this deck really doesn't have a lot of back row hate, and that's going to be Topologic Trisbana, which is a great kind of step up into our Appaloosa if we're trying to make some bodies. If a monster is special summoned to a zone this monster points to, you can banish as many of those monsters as possible and as many spell or traps on the field as possible, then inflict 500 your opponent for each of their cards banished by this effect. So it's basically a board wipe for spell and trap cards. It is very, very strong against certain matchups, and in others it wouldn't necessarily be. You can really play a lot of other cards in this slot. I am opting for Topologic Trisbana in this current list. Now we're going to talk about our Xyz monsters, as these are really going to be the bread and butter for this deck. These are going to be the strongest plays we are making for the most part. So our two rank 4s that we are playing a single copy of King of the Feral Imps. One of my favorite startups to make in this deck is if you have opened with just a single copy of Nunu, send to the graveyard, send Zohah along with it. As we've mentioned, you will then discard a card, add Zohah back, normal Zohah, special Nunu, make King of the Feral Imps. Now, after you've made King of the Feral Imps, you can detach a material to add any reptile from deck to hand. There are lots of extenders we can choose from, but the two most common are going to be either Reptilianne Coatl or Nauya, if you do not have a copy of one of those in your hand. If you do have a copy of one, add the other, because ideally you would love to have both, because those are, again, your best extenders. The other rank 4 that we are running is Rika Queen Strenna. Now, this is a very random, seemingly random, generic card that is any 2 level 4 monsters. Most of its effects you can ignore, except for the one that says, if this card is tributed with Xyz material, you can then special summon a rank 5 or higher plant Xyz monster from your extra deck or graveyard. Now, the one that we are going to be running is Sacred Tree Beast Hyperiton. This is a super cool, again, extra boss monster that we can extend into. So if we do happen to make this card and then tribute it off to summon, for instance, our Keurse or our Aleirt, we will then get our Sacred Tree Beast Hyperiton for free in addition to the other bodies that we're summoning. Now, this is a rank 9 Xyz monster with 2600 attack and 1900 defense. During your turn, anytime you activate a card or effect, as a quick effect, you can target a card of the same type, monster, spell, or trap, in your graveyard, and attach that card to this card as material. During your opponent's turn, when a card or effect is activated, you can then detach a material of the same type to negate the activation of that card and destroy it. So it will start when it's summoned immediately. Rika Queen Strenna here does attach itself to that monster, so it will start with at least one monster material, and if you follow it up with any of the many spells in this deck, you can potentially attach a different spell from your graveyard to it, so it will be either a monster or a spell negate. You do have to only use the effect once, so it can be either of those, but it's a nice little negate that you can put up on the board. That's the two most relevant types in the game by far. So yeah, that's an extra free body that we can get off a little rank 4 play there. Now moving up, we are also playing, of course, a couple of rank 8s. We are going to be playing our single copy of the Zombie Vampire. It takes 2 or more level 8 monsters. If you use a monster with a level that is owned by your opponent for this Xyz summon, you can treat it as level 8. Neither player can target this card with effects of special summon monsters, except monsters that were summoned from the graveyard, so a little bit of protection there. You can also detach material. Each player must then send 4 cards from their deck to the graveyard. Then if any monsters are sent to either graveyard by this effect, you can special summon one of them to your field. So this is, again, a great extender that also puts a big, beefy body with some protection on the board, while still recycling some bodies back into your graveyard. It's also a nice way to load your graveyard to see if you can hit some of your other graveyard-based effects and continue rotating from there. Next up, our other real big Xyz that we're going to be making is number 97, Draglubian. Of course, any deck making rank 8 Xyz monsters is going to want to be making Draglubian, and we are playing the tried and true Numeron Dragon OTK. Now that strategy, however, is even more scary in this deck, since you only potentially need to make Draglubian and have 2 extra monsters on the field in order to actually pull off the OTK. If your opponent has an attack position monster in play, just one, all you have to do is make Reptilianne Coatl reduce its attack to 0, summon Draglubian, use Draglubian's effect to summon Numeron Dragon. Numeron Dragon then detaches. You'll see a total of 9 ranks in play, giving it 9,000 attack. Swing over the new 0 attack monster, and you have a basically free OTK. That is easily the best kind of archetype specific way to win with this deck is by going for that very simple play. But if you're going first, obviously that's not necessarily an option, and you are going to need other things to do. So other cards that you can bring out with Draglubion, we are playing a copy of number 92, Heart Earth Dragon. Most often this is the card that I use as the material for whatever else I summon out, but we are also playing a copy of number 38, Hope Harbinger Dragon, Titanic Galaxy. This is basically a free spell negate on both turns. Anytime either player activates a spell card once per turn, you can attach that spell to this card's material and negate its effects. You can also, as a quick effect, if your opponent attacks, detach a material from Hope Harbinger to redirect the attack to it. It's really awesome protection, and that's actually an extremely relevant effect that comes up very, very often as long as you have the board locked up super well. If you have Destiny Hero Plasma in play, for instance, and they're trying to get over it, you can then hopefully back it up with Hope Harbinger Dragon, so they will have to swing into Hope Harbinger Dragon before dealing with Plasma. It's really a really awesome lock that I don't think too many other decks are capable of making. It's also really nice for redirecting attacks away from Aron and your Masked Hero Darklaw if you're trying to keep those in play. Basically, not only is this a free spell negate, it's a really beneficial way of keeping your problem pieces in play so your opponent has a harder time of dealing with them. But yeah, that's going to about do it for this deck profile, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is a very unique deck. Like I said, it's in a kind of a difficult spot. Decks that want to be playing out of the graveyard are having a hard time with the current meta the way it is, but if you're looking to have some fun on Master Duel, this is a list that is completely updated for the TCG. However, it is worth mentioning that on Master Duel, you do still have access to Chaos Ruler. So even though Chaos Ruler has been banned out of the TCG, so unfortunately you can no longer run that card, it is completely legal to play in this list. However, you'll notice it is omitted. I did want to show you guys a completely TCG legal list as of the making of this video, but yeah, that is going to about do it, guys. Thank you all for joining me. Once again, I am an avid herpetologist. If you guys have been enjoying the content, feel free to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. Let me know if you guys have been playing with the Ogdoadic archetype yourself, or maybe have suggestions about how to improve this particular list. With that, that's going to about do it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night, and I will see you all next time.